Right, take two. Good morning, everyone. My name is Thomas Reutman. I'm a hearing officer for San Francisco Public Works. Cerise Waiters is the clerk for this hearing. This hearing is being recorded via Zoom and will be available afterward through a link on the San Francisco Public Works website, sfpublicworks.org. As this is a virtual hearing, there's no sign-in sheet. So if you'd like to receive information about the results of this hearing, please send an email to the email address listed on the hearing notice. If you do not have that with you, please contact the Bureau of Urban Forestry at urbanforestry@sfdpw.org. The public hearing is being held to consider 4 items. First, public comment, where members of the public may address me on matters that are within the department's jurisdiction, but not on today's agenda. Next, we'll be hearing order 208994 to consider an appeal for illegal removal at 2195 Golden Gate Avenue. Hearing order number 208995 for failure to protect a street tree at 633 Cabrillo Avenue. And hearing order 208996 for illegal pruning at 189 to 191 Corbett Avenue. My job as the hearing officer is to gather the facts for the hearing item, listen to your testimonies, and help our Director of Public Works make determinations. I will not be making any decisions today. Instead, I will forward the findings from this hearing and make my recommendations to the director. The director will make the final determinations. When the director's determinations are made, the department will notify you of them if you've provided your contact information. The hearing will proceed as follows for the 5 cases. First, I'll ask Public Works staff to speak and present the case. Then I'll allow the property owner, applicant, or appellant to speak. Then any member of the public or witness who wants to speak. And then the department, if the department would like to address any comments. And then if I feel it's warranted, I'll allow an opportunity for further clarification by the appellant. Each speaker will have up to 3 minutes to speak. The clerk will monitor the time for all speakers and will indicate when the speaker has 30 seconds left. If you are a party to this proceeding, I will call on you to speak. If you'd like to use visual materials in your presentation, please let me know before you speak. You will then have the standard 3 minutes to provide your comments. If you are a member of the public or witness who would like to speak, wait for me to call for public comments, then use Zoom's raise your hand feature to put yourself in the queue to speak. If you've dialed in by phone, raise your hand by pressing *9, and when told you are being unmuted, press *6 to unmute yourself before speaking. When it is your turn to speak, I will recognize you. Again, if you'd like to use visual materials in your presentation, please let me know before you speak. You'll then have the standard 3 minutes to provide your comments. Comments and questions should be addressed to me and not to the department or the applicant. If you cannot finish your comments within the allotted time, you may submit written testimony to me by the end of this hearing. If I feel that a question is warranted, I will ask the question. After all comments are completed, I will close the item. We'll now begin the hearing. So we'll start with matters in Public Works purview, but not on today's agenda. Are there any comments?
I don't see any hands raised, Mr. Reutman.
Okay, thank you. Hearing none, we'll move to hearing order number 208994 to consider an appeal for the illegal removal of 2 street trees adjacent to 2195 Golden Gate Avenue. Fine issued for $20,000. May I have Public Works make its presentation?
Good morning. My name is Brian Ong. I am the Urban Forestry representative for today. And before I go on to the case for Golden Gate, I'll kind of go through a few slides before then. So this is for the administrative hearing, January 17th, 2024. Let's see. So Public Works Code, Article 16, the Urban Forestry Ordinance, Section 808, protection of trees and landscape is injury or destruction of trees are prohibited. It shall be unlawful for any person to intentionally, maliciously, or through gross negligence injure or destroy a street tree, any tree on city property, a significant tree, um, or a landmark tree. In addition to the penalties set forth, the director may require any person who removes or destroys a tree in violation of the provisions of this article to pay for each tree removed or destroyed a sum of $10,000 or the tree's replacement value, whichever is greater. The director may require any person who injures a tree in violation of the provisions of this Article 16 to pay a sum of money equal to the diminishment of the tree's value set forth in the current edition of the Guide for Plant Appraisal. And where a budding property owner removed a street tree or trees without obtaining a permit, the department shall require the property owner plant a replacement tree or trees with a total diameter 6 inches above ground that is equal to or greater than the total diameter of the street tree or trees that were removed without a permit. And so this is Article 16, Section 806, just permanent planting and removal of street trees. So basically, if the department grants a tree removal permit, it shall require that it's a street tree or trees of equivalent replacement value to the one removed be planted in the place of the removed tree or impose an in lieu fee, unless it makes written findings detailing the basis for waiving or modifying this requirement. For construction, protection of street trees, if excavation, construction, or street tree work is planned within the drip line of a significant tree, a landmark tree, or a tree of any street or other publicly owned property, said tree or trees shall be adequately protected. If any construction work results in the injury or damage to such trees, the responsibility parties may be subject to the penalties set forth by Section 811 of this article. So this is just a few definitions to injure or injury. Basically, pruning, which in and of itself will kill or cause a tree to decline, or severing of all or part of a tree. This is a penalties for violation, Section 811. Kind of what I said before, the director may require someone who removes a tree or destroys a tree pay $10,000 or the tree's replacement value, whichever is greater. And when one or more additional violations of the provisions of this Article 16 occur within 1 year of the first violation, the director may assess a responsible party $20,000 for each removed or destroyed tree, and double the diminishment of the injured tree's value. And so, in summary, trees are more than just beautiful additions to our urban life. They are an essential component of the city's ecosystem and provide enormous environmental and social benefits. A permit is required to remove any street tree, significant tree, or landmark tree. It is illegal to injure a tree. Injuries can include excessive pruning and malicious acts like nailing objects to a tree, and neglect acts like vehicular accidents. An illegal removal of a tree requires replacement with equivalent inches in total diameter of the street tree or trees that were removed. It is property owner's responsibility to know the law. Ignorance is not an excuse. So here are some best management practices. Do not remove more than 25% of the tree's canopy each year. Usually doing this will stress the tree and may produce weakly attached branches the following year. This can lead to decline or possibly death of the tree. Do not cut back to a branch that is less than 1/3 or 1/2 the size of the main branch. Severing all or parts of the tree and topping. It's important to selectively remove branches throughout the tree, not just the lowest branch. Um, Removing the lowest branch is sometimes called limbing up. This can cause a tall, spindly tree to form, and it can also reduce trunk flare and girth of the tree. Lower branches help keep the vigor in the lower portion of the tree, and this is especially important in conifers. Um, some illegal practices. Do not top trees. Topping trees, also called hat racking, heading, or rounding over, is the practice of cutting a terminal branch to a stump or to a lateral branch that is not large enough to assume the terminal role. In general, topping is not acceptable. Way to reduce a tree's canopy. In certain situations, a professional arborist may use topping to remove hazardous branches and prolong the life of a mature tree. Topping city street trees is illegal. Anyone who tops street trees is liable and will be fined. Um, Here is a photo of topping, weakly attached rapid new growth. You can see the tree is just trying to put out some new growth um, to try and survive, which will cause weakly attached branches. And eventually this tree died. Here's another photo of the tall, spindly, weakly attached branches, like water sprouts that are coming out. The tree is just trying to get some foliage out to try and survive. Again, this tree died. And then here's another example of topping. You can see rapid new growth, highly prone to limb failure. You can see some of the previous cuts down here, and the tree is just kind of intertwined, and everything's some included bark and weakly attached branches. Here is another example of improper pruning, which leads to entry points for pathogens. As you can see, some of the cuts, and then some of the pathogens and entry points for the of the tree. And then here's an example of what not to do. Topping is not the same as pollarding. Pollarding must be started when the trees are young and can only be performed on certain species of trees. Um, so here's an example. On the left-hand side is pollarding. It's kind of been um, practiced from the tree's like start of its life, and you're pruning all the way back to the knuckle of the tree, and then on the right hand side is just someone just topping the tree and removing most of the foliage, making some heading cuts. So pollarding, like you can see these in front of City Hall. Those are good examples of proper pollarding. Um, all the trees in front of City Hall. And then the high voltage power lines conflicts are the responsibility of PG&E's line clearance certified arborists. So if you have any questions or concerns about trees growing into lines, usually the lowest line below the transformer are secondary lines, and they are designed to come into contact. They hold a lower voltage and have insulation, so they are designed to come into contact um, with vegetation. But if it's above the transformer, those are the high voltage lines, and those need clearance. But we like to just have the tree grow within those lines, in the lower lines to kind of hide everything. But it's the topmost lines above this cylindrical transformer that you need to be concerned about. So if you have any concerns, you can always just give us a call or shoot us an email, and we can help you with those questions. And so this is Street Tree SF. Basically, in 2017, the city passed a law, and uh, the city of San Francisco is responsible for maintaining every street tree in the city. So there's a $19 million annual set aside in the city's general fund for Street Tree SF. And basically, we had a census completed in 2016. Um, um, which created priorities and a routine proactive tree pruning schedule for the city's 125,000 street trees. And so this is kind of like a map. You can go on our website and take a look and type in your address and see when it was pruned or when it will be pruned next. And so this is just kind of a priority of where we're going to be pruning, and usually the green is lower priority, and red is high priority. And so it is a work in progress. Since the start of Street Tree SF, I believe this figure is wrong. It's not 68%. I think it's a little bit more than that, probably more around 80% now. Of the total tree maintenance needs have been addressed by contractors and city arborists, and more than 85,000 trees have been pruned. So there's information outreach. We'll send a letter to the homeowner and leave a door hanger when we do come through or plan to come through and prune the trees. So if there's any questions or concerns, those pamphlets and door hangers have all the information to reach out to us. And so to continue with the hearing, order number 208-994-2195 Golden Gate Ave, to consider an appeal for the legal removal of 2 street trees adjacent to 2195 Golden Gate Ave. The fine issued is $20,000. So basically, in August 2023, I received a message from our supervisor claiming that somebody was pruning some trees in the public right-of-way. So I went out and kind of assessed the whole situation. So this is the property. It's 2195 Golden Gate, but the trees are on the 400 block of Masonic, and there's this fence, and there's 2 trees. There's a bunch of trees, but the 2 biggest trees are the ones that were being illegally pruned or removed. And as you can see here, this is just like an overview of the property. So basically, the public right-of-way is the edge of the curb all the way to the property line, and so that is 22 feet. And as you can see, the public right-of-way goes all the way to the property line. And so these 2 trees were removed and pruned illegally. You could see it's a lot of topping, heading cuts, some poor cuts. 100% of the foliage is removed. And about each of these squares is 3 feet. And so pretty much all the way to the bush on the right is where the property line ends. And so these 2 trees that are being considered illegal removals are in the public right of way and are street trees. So this is the first tree. You could see, I said before, it's 100% of the foliage is removed. Some topping cuts. You could see some tear outs and stuff like that. And then this is another angle of the tree, and behind the fence line, one of the trunks of the tree had fallen previously during the winter storms, and so the homeowner was just trying to do some cleanup of the tree. Here's the second tree. You can kind of see it was a tall one, and some heading cuts and some tear outs occurred. Bad pruning practices. So because of those poor cuts, we considered it, and it's pretty much irreversible. We consider this an illegal removal without a permit. And so I just want to kind of go over some history. Basically, the homeowner had applied to remove the tree, or a street tree, a dead street tree on Masonic in 2020. The tree was dead in this photo. This is from 2019. But the tree was dead. We withdrew the application and our own tree crews removed the tree, but the homeowner did apply to have one of the trees in the public right of way removed. And so basically the homeowner was aware that you did need a permit to remove a tree in the public right of way. And so that should have been addressed when they were removing the trees, or pruning the trees at least, because they were in the public right of way. So to be consistent with how we deal with similar cases, we have fined the owner for illegal removal of 2 street trees. That's it.
Thank you, Brian. Is the appellant present? Looks like the appellant has his hand up.
Yes, thank you. My name is Alan Scott, property owner at 2195 Golden Gate. To start our section, I'd like to invite Ellen Shea to who is an ISA certified arborist to ultimately report on the information she gathered from the property site. Would you, Mr. Reutman, be sharing, or would you like me to share the presentation? I guess, how would that work?
If you have the
me.
presentation available, it's probably easier if you share, because then you can go through it, with your timing.
Okay.
Okay.
If you'd like to share, I will promote you to a panelist. You'll see an instruction on your screen, and then it'll tell you once you come in as a panelist, unmute yourself again and begin your sharing. And
Thank you.
so I can only do one of you at a time. Is Ms. Shea going to speak after you, or?
She's going to be the primary speaker regarding the presentation, the arborist presentation. Yes.
Okay. So I'll go ahead and promote you, and then you'll be able to share, and you will have 3 minutes, and then I'll do the same for her when you're done.
So maybe she would be the presentation. She would primarily be presenting this first presentation. And am I able to share and her able to speak?
Yes, we can do that. Yes.
Okay.
But let me promote you to panelist first, okay? Just a moment.
Hi, good morning. I would like to request that I do. I'd like to request that I do 2 minutes of the time, and then Alan can have 1 minute. Is that acceptable?
Sure, that's fine. I'll begin the timer as soon as you are ready to start speaking.
Okay, great. Next slide, please. Alan. I would like to say that the trees in question are actually not the original trees that were planted in this site. They looked like this in March of 2022. Next slide, please. But actually, they were illegally removed by the previous owner sometime between April 2008 and May 2011. Next slide, please. They began to grow back, and by the time the current owner bought the property in late 2017, they looked like natural trees again, but they weren't. Next slide, please. They're actually stump sprouts, and stump sprouts are weakly attached. They are prone to decay. They're only attached on a very thin layer outside of a dead stump, and they are likely to fail, as they did in June of this year, not in the winter storms. Next slide. We can see in the next picture the trunk of one of them that failed and damaged some furniture. Next slide, please. The owner consulted a tree service, and the other tree, although it didn't fail, has got a lot of cracks from twisting in the wind. Again, these sprouts grow fast and they're very brittle. Next, please. The owner consulted a tree service. Because the trees were located behind a fence, he did not understand they were in the public right-of-way. The tree service also did not really advise the owner that a permit was or might be required. The trees were already illegally removed years ago, and the owner attempted to mitigate a hazard. He would have applied for a permit if he had known it was necessary. At this point, let's remove these stump sprouts, grind the stumps, and plant better trees. Next slide. There are 3 possible locations for mitigation, one on private and 2 public on Masonic Avenue. There are more details in my report. Thank you.
You for that.
Go ahead, Mr. Scott.
Yeah. Firstly, thank you for hearing our case today. Per the incident and timeline laid out by Ellen Shea, the situation's been certainly concerning for us, our families, our neighbors, and everyone living at 2195 Golden Gate, including the family and children that reside on this property. From the beginning, our intentions were to ensure the property and the occupants remain safe from a potentially dangerous situation. They regularly interact in the backyard. And so we saw this as a dangerous situation. We take great pride in our city, our neighborhood, our environment, and assure you in the department, we felt the decision to remove this tree was urgent per the recommendation of the arborist that we consulted in August of 2023 prior to any removal of or pruning of the 2 eucalyptus trees. Unfortunately, we were not informed of the procedures required to remove a tree, nor were we informed of the status or the classification of significant or street trees. And we're under the assumption that trees that were behind a private fence line were the sole responsibility of the property owners. We did remove a tree primarily in the 2020 period per the report delivered by the Department of Public Works, not through our own application, but through Friends of Urban Forest. Friends of Urban Forest contacted us about the dead tree and handled the entire removal process on their own, without informing us of any additional detail about the removal and classification processes of such a tree. I certainly now understand that the permit process is required for the safety of the community for both significant as well as street tree classifications. And for that, we sincerely apologize. We learned a great deal through this process, and we'll now go above and beyond to ensure we consult DPW for any and all broad future land use issues. For the condition of the tree, the history of the tree, multiple arborist recommendations, the fallen branch incident, and the complete information we've gathered and presented today, we would like to request you approve our permit application retroactively and allow us to pay the $458 application fee to remove these 2 diseased hazardous trees. If it is possible for the department lead to consider retroactively approving these trees due to the evidence we presented today, without the need for appeals processes, we appreciate that consideration so we can finish this work and ensure everyone continues to remain safe on property and in the neighboring community. So thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you. I have a question for the appellant, Mr. Scott. So as the urban forester explained earlier that I presume you had already applied to have that dead tree removed in 2020. So you were presumably aware that there's a process for taking a tree out and getting city approval before taking action. And I appreciate the urgency of, after the fallen limb and so forth of needing to take action, but had you reached out to anyone other than the arborist you consulted at the city to, determine if there were any requirements or permit applications for the trees that you removed?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Like I had said, I was unaware of the process of the urban forestry department as a whole. I had no idea that that was a department. What we had done was we saw signs in the neighborhood for Friends of Urban Forest. If you go to the friendsofurbanforest.org website, you can submit an interest form. It takes you to a form and it says, hey, we'd love to work with Friends of Urban Forest, FUF, because there's a tree that's, there's an existing tree that's dead. All we did was fill out that web form on Friends of Urban Forest and never interacted with the urban forestry department of the Department of Public Works, because Friends of Urban Forest filled out everything else. I've never seen what was presented by Mr. Ong in regard to the application to remove that dead tree, because we worked through this intermediary Friends of Urban Forest, which are essentially a volunteer organization responsible for ultimately these types of tree replacements or tree plantings. So again, that information was not privy to me personally, because we never interacted directly with Department of Public Works for ultimately any other issue related to this property since the purchase of the home. So yeah, I hope that answers your
Okay.
question.
Yeah. I guess I'll toss it back to Mr. Ong for a minute. Is there, in what you showed, is that consistent with the process as you understand it, that FUF reaches out to BUF to submit the application directly?
Yeah, usually they'll submit an application, but it'll have somewhere in the application like FUF is removing this tree or something like that. As far as I'm concerned, when I looked at the permit, there was no like mention of FUF in the application. It was most likely a digital application, so there's no form that we have that we scan. So they might have done it online, and basically if they just filled out all the information of the homeowner, they didn't put that FUF was removing the tree or anything like that.
Yeah. If I could make one other comment, Mr. Reutemann.
Sure.
Yeah, so I did consult the arborist, which is the Bartlett Tree Experts, which have multiple locations in the Bay Area. And I did submit the proposal we received from them in August of 2023 to be submitted as a hearing document. In that proposal, they identified that the 7-stem eucalyptus stump, as well as the 2-stem eucalyptus stump, be removed from the property because of a hazardous tree. They did, in their report, state that there was a requirement to have a temporary occupancy permit for equipment parking as the only permit requirement associated with their proposal. There was no proposal associated with a dollar amount for removal of the tree, nor any mention of classification of them as street tree or significant tree. These trees are located behind a property fence line 20 feet away from the curb. So there was certainly some confusion, I think, not only by myself, but from the trained arborist company, Bartlett Tree Expert Company, in terms of what these trees are classified. If Bartlett had in any way indicated to us verbally or written that there was a permit removal process for these trees, we would have 100% gone through that process. All they stated was they needed an occupancy permit for parking. So unfortunately, we were poorly advised by the arborist company we initially hired to do the work, to ultimately apply for any permit application in this process.
So I'm looking at the Bartlett invoice that you're citing, and it says pruning of 3 plums and 1 almond group. Is that the same trees that we're talking about?
No, those are additional trees that are on the property that are farther away, much, much smaller trees. As Brian had mentioned, there's a few other trees back there. It's the removal of the painted stem.
Oh, okay, I
eucalyptus.
see it. I see there's a follow-on list of removal. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. So when this arborist came to look at the trees, they didn't advise you verbally or in anywhere in writing that, you know, if you're within the right of way, you need to get a city approval first.
Unfortunately not.
Okay, that's unfortunate and irresponsible of the if they're seasoned arborists in the city of San Francisco, they should know the process. Just trying to think if so are you aware now, having been shown the presentation, that the trees are actually in the right of way, even though they're, you know, for all intents and purposes within your property, they're actually on the public space?
Yes, yes, I am, and I've, you know, like I've said, you know, I've learned an incredible amount during this process, and you know what I've learned is that the city right of way for this particular block, which does change very, you know, between you know, different blocks or different street corners, you know, they vary across the city, and for this particular block, the city right of way is 22 feet from the curb, which makes essentially anything from 22 feet to 32 feet a significant tree, anything within that 22 feet street tree. Now, the property itself, although, you know, in the image shows a certain property land use mapping for street use and mapping, sort of overhangs across the sidewalk in many different locations, all extending this over the sidewalk to 12 feet in some areas where the property is. And the fence line actually sits far dating back before we purchased the property, 16 feet from the curb. So it's still a significantly sized curb, but it matches actually the 22-foot curb, which is where ultimately the property line is drawn, looking further into zoning and mapping. So as you can see, the fence, that's again predating us by many years, as well as some additional shrubbery in front of the house, all sit essentially at that 16-foot mark. And so I now fully understand that, you know, for this particular block, the city right of way is actually a 22 from the curb, despite where, you know, the historical fence line had been.
Okay, thank you for acknowledging that. And I would urge you to look at your disclosure documents on your purchase and make sure you understand, you know, what the true public right of way versus your property line extents are, so that you don't run into further problems with this. Because this happens a lot at the city, where someone buys a house and it has, you know, some illegally fenced out planter, and then the owner assumes it's in their purview when it's actually city property.
Yeah, I did alongside the real estate company that we had purchased the home from in 2017, view the 175-page disclosure packet as a resource, looking for any mention of the fence line and the public right of way. Unfortunately, there was no information within that disclosure packet that the fence did not comply with ultimately the public right of way. And so unfortunately, that information was not provided to us in our disclosure packet. I didn't feel it pertinent to submit that entire disclosure packet for review, but I did look for that in the disclosure packet.
I appreciate you doing your due diligence on it. Well, okay, so I appreciate what you're saying, and hopefully it sounds like you understand the city's disappointment with what transpired. I guess one follow-up question I have for the department is, if we could go in a time machine and the property owner had submitted an application to remove these trees, given the conditions that were identified by the arborist. Would the city, I mean, obviously you can't do it without an inspection of your own, but based on the photos and the conditions noted, is there a likelihood that the city would have granted removal of these trees?
Brian Ong, Urban Forestry. Yeah, I think I would have approved this first tree with the multi-stem. The second tree, it'd probably be on the fence whether or not we would approve that. So at least we would approve the one tree. Um, but yeah,
Okay, so on the fence, on the one behind the fence.
yeah, yeah,
Okay, I'm just trying to establish, that the property owner, seems like they acknowledge that they didn't understand the process, and had they known, they would have applied, and just wanted to see where that path would have taken us.
yeah.
Um, okay, I don't think I have any other questions. I'm gonna review all the documents that they submitted, like the arborist reports and the other supporting documents and the testimony. And I guess one thing that I think you noted in the presentation, or the Ms. Shea did, was that you're offering as a compromise to plant 3 new trees. And is that something that you would be willing to do in consultation with the city, with Buff, to ensure that the appropriate trees are planted, as well as attend an online tree course to learn about the proper pruning?
Yes, per the report and in our recommendation, we'd like to replace the 2 trees 1 for 1. So replace with 2 trees. We proposed 3 locations for the trees, 2 on the street and 1 behind the fence line. Our preference would be to replace the 2 trees in the 2 locations on the Masonic Street, and care for those trees as property owners moving forward. And and I would be certainly happy to attend a session as well to learn more about the trees, the department, and ultimately ensure we're well informed and educated moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you for your willingness to work with the city, and appreciate your testimony. Is there anyone else in attendance that would like to speak to this order?
There are no hands, Mr. Reutemann.
Okay, thank you. Then with that, we'll close this order and move to hearing order number 208995.
Brian Ong, Urban Forestry, order number 208995 for 633 Cabrillo Ave. To consider an appeal for the failure to protect 1 street tree adjacent to 633 Cabrillo Avenue. Fine issued is equal to the appraised value of the tree. The fine issued is $2,500. So here's the subject tree. This is for project 1177L or I believe. Cabrillo repaving work at 633 Cabrillo. Public Works project and contractor hired a consulting arborist to systematically review street clearances in advance of traffic being shifted to the parking lane during the repavement project. The arborist made an assessment that there was sufficient clearance in support of preserving street trees and not suggesting removal. So on October 12th, a box truck hit a main scaffold branch that destabilized the tree, destabilized the main trunk, kind of split in half. And so Public Works Manager contacted Buff about the incident the same day. The next day, the paving work took place in morning to complete repaving work. And the same day, Buff inspected and posted the tree for emergency removal. So here's a close-up of the tree of what happened afterwards. It's split in half, so that's why we posted it for emergency removal. It's a 10-inch diameter New Zealand Christmas tree, and Buff inspected the tree the day after being struck and posted the tree for removal. The main trunk is splitting and is hazardous. Pruning cannot mitigate the structural failure. The site cannot be replaced because of the clearance requirement to the street light, and the contractor was assessed a violation for failure to protect the tree during construction in the amount equal to the assessed value of the tree, which is $2,500, to try to capture the loss of the tree and site. Basically, that fee will go towards planting another tree in the area. We'll plant a tree and maintain it for 3 years. The contractor filed and paid for a retroactive construction removal permit for $923. Permit number in our database is 794-861. And so here is just a photo of the truck, the box truck that struck the tree and where it was. And then on the right-hand side is kind of like a drawing of where the tree stood. So we usually require a 14-foot clearance. So, you know, if the box trucks are going into that are higher than 11 feet, then, you know, something should have been done, you know, mitigation, removing the branch or possibly moving the lane to somewhere else. But, you know, if there's a big box truck and you're taking out street tree parking and it's going down what is usually a parking lane, you know, you got to make sure that there's enough clearance over the road for that box truck to go through. Usually the construction manager and the project team will identify that and contact us if anything needs to be done to the tree. So here's another photo the day after the tree was struck, and they continued the repaving project. And then here's just like a kind of a visual. November 14th, Buff held a conference call with Public Works, Construction Management, the contractor and consulting arborist to review what happened. The outcome of the call identified a process in the future to prevent similar incidents from happening again. A tree or trees with borderline clearance concern that cannot be mitigated with pruning need to be flagged to the project management team, contractor, and Buff. The contractor should work to implement a traffic control system in order to avoid these trees that get flagged as special cases. This may require additional traffic management review and permits from SFMTA for lane closures. Projects need to account for this in project planning and coordination. This was an unfortunate incident, and the lessons have been learned and best practices adopted for future projects. So to be consistent with how we deal with similar cases, we have fined the contractor the appraised value of the tree. That's it.
Thank you, Brian. Is the appellant present?
Go ahead
Yes,
and
hello,
speak.
can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Scott Wheeler. I'm a board certified master arborist here in San Francisco with the Urban Arborist. Thanks, Mr. Voigtman. Thanks, Brian. Good to see you again. It's been a while. Sarah Stacy was the arborist representative from the city. She's the district inspecting arborist who I've been working with on this. This is a lot more cut and dry than the previous case. I mean, the damage occurred because I made a poor judgment call. That's just based on years of experience with these projects all over the city. We've been enlisted by various contractors doing roadwork repairs in just about every neighborhood you can imagine in San Francisco. And you can see the trees in this image on the other side of the street. We cleared up well over the street for the clearance, and then we came onto this side of the street to do the same clearance. And because the way this row of Metrosideros trees grows, They have very vertical upright structures, multi-forks at a pretty low level. And my assessment at the time was that that's a major structural limb, leaning over the street, not close enough to the path of travel that it could actually be impacted. I thought the only other option would be to take off that entire structural limb, which was one of the main limbs on that tree, and kind of condemning that tree. So in reflecting back on this with Sarah and the department, the Bureau of Urban Forestry, whenever I run into cases like this in the future, where it's a judgment call between removing a very large, important dominant stem or a scaffold limb that could compromise the ultimate health or stability of a tree, structural stability, I mean, then I would flag that, and I would ask the department to come out, send an inspector to assess it with me, which we have done in prior situations where the limbs have been a lot more obvious, lower big branches leaning way out over the path of travel, and we have augmented travel plans for the road repair. But in this case, the trees alongside this one are all very similar structure. I'm a me tree guy, me no do computer. I have some pictures on here I don't know if I could share, but just along that line, especially from the other perspective, you can see it's all very similar structures with limbs leaning out over the path of travel at a high point and a gradual lean. I just determined that this one would be safe. It obviously wasn't. Unfortunately, it was impacted to the point where the tree had to be removed. We took the tree out at our cost. We're obviously going to plant trees. Sarah and I have looked at other basins in the area where we can plant a new tree. So I accept responsibility, and really I'm just here to throw myself at the mercy of the court, hoping we might be able to get the fine reduced a little bit. But yeah, like Brian said, I'm glad it was addressed. This is something that we have learned a lesson from, that we can kind of build off of and make sure it doesn't happen, because there are these other situations all over town that we can address. So hopefully it doesn't happen again. The one thing I would ask the city about is if there is a 14-foot requirement of clearance over the curb, then why this was already down at a low enough point where it could get hit at 11 feet, which I measured actually 1 foot out from the curb, not 2 feet as seen in the drawing. But if the city's maintaining these trees, then why don't they provide the clearance to begin with if there's already supposed to be a 14-foot clearance? So that's my only sort of innocuous question for the city. Other than that, I apologize that we have to take time talking about this, and won't happen again.
Thank you. So sorry for my confusion, but Mr. Wheeler, so you were you hired by the contractor to examine the site to establish the suitability of doing the work in that space, or it was after the tree was damaged? I'm just trying to understand what you were explaining about your assessment.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so I get hired by the various contractors doing the road repair to come in ahead of these street projects, to assess the trees in a given area and do the actual clearance work. So a week prior to this road work, we had pruned the trees on both sides of this block, which is Cabrillo. I believe it's between 8th and 9th Avenue. So we pruned up those trees you can see on the left, on the other side of the street, so it has that nice flat level for clearance. And we pruned these trees as well, all the branches that were lower and hanging down into the path of travel. And I've been doing that all over the city for various road work contractors for the past 3 to 4 years, probably.
So your process is to look at overhanging branches, low hanging branches, and, basically recommend pruning those up to provide adequate clearance for driving and paving in that space. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then, so how do you assess when you see a branch that it's okay to leave it or to remove it? It sounds like in this case, you weighed, I don't want to take out this very significant branch on this tree because it could harm the tree, and leaving it in is better for the tree, but maybe the clearance is slightly inadequate. Is that correct?
Exactly.
So
yeah.
So is there any guidelines or measurements that you follow to basically create a clearance envelope that, like, what's the, I mean, I understand it was a mistake and a lesson learned, but how would you arrive at recommending that the tree can stay or not stay now? Where do you measure from? How high and how far over do you go before you say, I think there's a clearance issue?
Right. So if we're looking at it just completely objectively by quantifiable numbers, we would go right at the edge of the curb and go up 14 feet and shave off everything that crosses within that plane. So I use a laser rangefinder to get specific heights and distances. And that's how we determine the level that we need to clear so that the vehicles, when they're being moved from the driving lanes into the parking lanes, that they have adequate clearance. And I don't assume that a vehicle is going to be traveling with its wheels along the curb or that close to the curb. They're usually a few feet away. And so in my judgment, I assessed these leaning branches, which were on all of these trees, with these limbs of varying thickness, this one being the most significant, that it didn't lean out far enough, low enough to be at risk. I knew that it crossed within that 14-foot plane, but it seemed to me that it was high enough up and close enough to the curb that vehicles would be able to pass, and most would, and none of the other branches on the other side of that particular tree were impacted. So the takeaway from this is that whenever I see a significant limb like that, crossing within that 14-foot plane at curb, then I will flag it and talk to whoever is the representative from urban forestry to figure a workaround, either through construction or some kind of way, putting on a reflector or a flag or something to do it. And if we decide that removing that limb would be in the best interest of the tree, I mean, obviously this is worst case scenario. I tried to protect the tree, and in doing so, I ended up killing it, condemning it, basically. So that's the exact opposite of what I was trying to do. But I hope that makes sense in terms of how I arrive at determinations for clearances.
Yeah, no, I understand. I appreciate that explanation. I'm just looking at the photo that's being presented, and I'm curious how this asphalt, I don't know what it's called, a walking paver, is, what the height on that and clearance requirements to do the paving to the curb are as compared to the truck that actually hit the tree. The truck is like an unfortunate fluke that probably doesn't happen very often, but the paving, if they know they're paving that lane, it seems like the height of that truck would be 100% expected to run in that lane. Presumably, if the paver went by and didn't take the tree out, then it's lower clearance than the truck. But I'm trying to understand a little bit about how the approval process could work in a perfect world. Does this mean that anytime we do a project, we need to maintain 14 feet to the curb line unequivocally? Or are we still opening the door for, if you're a foot less and you're only 2 feet into the gutter, that it's okay to leave it because we want to? Or is there some kind of extra protection that can be applied to that tree that, like a low overpass sign, so that someone with a large vehicle would know they can't squeeze into that space? I'm throwing this out because I'm trying to establish if there's any, I guess if there's any wiggle room within our interpretation of the permitting process for traffic routing in the lane. I don't know if you get involved in that, Mr. Wheeler, with the MTA and the contractor in establishing the detouring permits and signage.
No, sir, I don't. The only exception with one of the other inspectors from BUF was when we determined 2 large sycamore trees were impossible to remediate for this kind of clearance. So we determined with the contractor that they would not be able to complete the project, as you see here, where they've moved the middle lanes to the outer lanes. And instead, what they did was they blocked off the entire block to through traffic, so that there were no chance of tour buses or box trucks needing to use any of the lanes. And then they just completed the job unobstructed, basically. And I have thrown around ideas with urban forestry, putting cones out underneath branches like this, or doing some kind of a bulb out if there's room, so people can drive around a low limb without going into the ditch.
Okay.
But in cases like this, and if we determine together that we can't take the whole limb off without compromising the potential future of the tree, then maybe we just have to block this off to through traffic. But the problem is, at the end of this block is an entrance to Safeway. It's pretty well traveled. That's probably where the box truck was going. It's kind of a busy area and not that easy to do. But I don't get involved with the permitting process with MTA. No.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand if, you know, in the future, a similar condition, if an MTA permit is issued for the proposed traffic rerouting, if there's any condition in there that says, make sure you have X amount of feet of clearance in every space that you're routing vehicles. Maybe that's something that we as the city need to examine the cross-referencing of those two field conditions within the permitting process. Is there anyone else from the in the hearing that's part of this case from the contractor, or anyone else that would like to make testimony on this hearing order?
No other hands at this time, Mr. Reutemann.
Okay. All right, I appreciate your testimony, and we'll close this hearing order and move to order number 208996.
Okay, Brian Ong, Urban Forestry, order number 208996. This is for 189 to 191 Corbett Ave. To consider an appeal for the illegal pruning of one street tree adjacent to 189 to 191 Corbett Avenue. The fine issued is equal to the diminished value of the tree. The fine issued is $1,200. So this is the tree in question. It's Deodar cedar. Buff responded to a report of illegal removal. When inspecting, arborist arrived. The work crew was not on site. The arborist determined that the stub cuts were left and select lower limbs were completely removed. The health and form are both negatively affected. And so in this photo, you can see some close-up photos of the stub cuts that were left behind, which is not part of our best management practices and proper pruning techniques. So on the left-hand side, you could see the before, and on the right-hand side, you could see the after. We understand that people need to do scaffolding and projects and stuff like that, but they should really reach out to us before they do any work like this, or even have us come out on site to see what they can prune, or even hire an ISA certified arborist that can do proper pruning techniques. So the tree was appraised the following. The replacement cost, basically the diminished value, is the appraised value minus our in lieu fee, and that's where we got the fee of $1,200. So to be consistent with how we deal with similar cases, we have fined the property owner. That's it.
Thank you, Brian. Is the appellant present?
I think they had to leave.
Mr. Yes, I
Yeah.
was gonna say they did have to leave and he told me that he was going to send his testimony to our email, but I don't know if one of his associates is in the audience and would like to speak as well. If you are present, can you raise your hand, please?
Yeah, the only person would be
No.
Evan. I'm not exactly sure.
They've submitted some letter or an email, I think, in the packet, but I guess we'll expect to see a written testimony.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Let's see, I guess in the absence of the appellant, is there anyone else in the room that would like to give testimony?
I don't think so. I see Evan put in this chat. He's waiting for it to end so he can make a public comment.
Okay, I think then, since there's nothing more on this order, we can take public comment.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, thank you, everyone. First time here. I just had a question,
All
actually,
right, can
not
you
a matter
state
of
your
public.
name for the recording, please?
Yes, of course. My name is Evan Wineland.
Thank you.
Of course. It's my first time here. I don't have a matter of public comment, but rather a question for this body. I have been trying to get in touch with a member of the commission to just ask some basic questions about litter removal in the city. And I'm wondering what would be the best contact, email or otherwise, for a lightweight conversation. I don't believe this is the perfect forum. I just want to get a name or an email address.
Are you trying to, you're asking the city's Bureau of Street Use and Mapping Group to remove litter at your property?
I actually just wanted to understand more beyond what's available online. I've scoured the commission's public website to kind of understand how things work in practice and the frequency of litter removal. I live around where Market hits Valencia, and so this is front of mind for me. Nothing more.
Okay, I think if you can provide your email, then we can, after the hearing, we can email you either a contact or a link to where you can get in touch with someone from that section of the department.
Done. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll try to get you in touch with someone that can help you with that. Thank you. Is there anyone else at the hearing with any additional public comments?
I think that's it.
Okay, well, hearing none, then we'll conclude this hearing, and thank you for your attendance.